Welcome back to Watchbox Studios. I am Tim Mosso, your host, and this is Watches Tonight. This evening, we're talking today's watch trends, a few that are late breaking, as well as watches that shaped the watchmaking world in the modern era. All of that, and I'm sharing your viewer wrist shots right here on Watches Tonight. Guys, check out the redesigned homepage of thewatchbox.com. Lots of fun window shopping, high-end, low-end, dive watch, dress watch, any make, model, or style, we have it. 3,000 late model pre-owned and vintage watches live right now. Let's see who's in the box live right now. Edward Ledden of Sweden, Blue Shirt Buddha, Matt Foster, Watchusiast joining in, this time from Dubai. Mark S. of Brooklyn, Alex O. Hello, Alex. We've got Mohammed O. from Dubai as well. Hail Bop. Sean B. from Temple, Texas. Henrique Casino, welcome. Richard Combs, South Florida. Marco Bernardi jumping in. We've got Nathan Silva, Matteo C., PT Loreno joining in from Zurich, staying up late with us in continental Europe. Likewise, Boutique 1 from Poland, Ordinary 999 from Norway, and we got Shea Berger, 87 from Hill Country, and Eric Nielsen from Asheville in the Carolinas. All right, guys, my American experience. Will you guys filter in, file in, and throng to the show? Let's talk a little bit about things I've learned over the years as an American. First, lots of good. We have a world-leading tech sector, which is great, right up to and including things you can drive. We have epic barbecue, and I do mean epic, and that's just like that's the tip of the iceberg. It gets much, much better from there. Possibly on a related note, we have these giant pigs that people keep shooting. I don't know, but as with grand complications, I'm happy to live in a world where that exists, just far from my door. That said, I've also learned a few things most Americans don't know. There are some things we as Americans generally don't know, such as the Michelin Man. He has a name. We don't know that name. We just call him the Michelin Man. Open a different window, keep me streaming, but he does have a name. Other things Americans don't necessarily know, the name of anyone in this photo, or for that matter, anyone in this photo. I mean, come on, forget it. Even in the era of the internet, no one's got a clue. We don't know when enough is enough sometimes. I got to admit, part of me thinks that cool. But, you know, I think that's cool because I'm an American. And, of course, any brand not named Rolex. I just kid, I kid. In fact, we know many Swiss watch brands, and we're becoming better and better at this as a people. We are now the second largest market, the USA is, for Swiss luxury watch exports, and we supplanted no less than Hong Kong on that chart. Guys, the USA has finally arrived in the world of watches. Yes, I know China's #1, but a few more people. All right, let's see what you guys are saying right here. We got John N. joining in from Queens. We got Derek M. from Austin, Texas. We've got Junior Johnson joining in. Peter C., who knows the name of Bibendum. That is the Michelin Man's real name. Check out early versions of the Michelin Man, by the way, if you want to have some nightmares. He was genuinely terrifying in the early years. And then right here, we've got Matthew G. joining in and Thomas Burnett. Welcome, guys. I asked you, answered viewer wrist shots #1. Khalid A. is ready for a drive in Dubai with his Omega Speedmaster Silver Snoopy 3 and his Ford GT. Getting ready for the Dubai. Well, I mean, at that, any part of Dubai you want in 5 minutes, I would say. Blaine T. of California crosses Golden Gate Bridge with his Moser Streamliner. Center seconds, lovely with matrix green dial and orange bridge, resplendent. Travis C. is on the go with a personal favorite of mine, HYT H0, while racing go-karts. Your day was more fun than mine. Then we have Mo K. of Milwaukee, also hitting the road, out for a drive with his 2021 Rolex Sub and Mercedes-Benz E-Class sedan, looking good. Evan B., Watchbox customer and Omega fan, puts his Seamaster Diver James Bond edition to hard work. Guys, send your wrist shots to mondaymailbag at thewatchbox.com to see those pieces on these pixels. Let's see what you guys are saying in the box right here. We have Peter C. saying, I've eaten at that restaurant in London. I think I missed the predecessor comment, but let's see what else is going on right here. Standout luxury watch trends of recent years. The surrogates for Baselworld and the SE have passed us, which means we can start to take account of everything that's changing. And let's forget about the obvious ones, the ones that are now years long, like, for example, integrated bracelet sports watches and bronze. For the most part, those are now passé. The trends are still there, but the dying embers. We're no longer in the heat of the moment. I would say, jumping straight into the stuff that really does appear to be on the cutting edge, launching the good metal first. Do you remember back in 2005 when Rolex launched the, well, nominally the 50th anniversary GMT? Remember that watch? The first supercase GMT, the first 6-digit reference GMT? And of course, it was all gold. All yellow gold, and you wouldn't get the steel for another 2 years. Now remember 2008, the launch of the supercase Submariner. Do you remember we could only get it in yellow or white gold at first? That gave us the Smurf. We couldn't buy the Hulk or the standard Lunette Noir in steel until 2010. Well, for 2021, the new Rolex Sub came out in steel right off the blocks, right out of the gate, immediately launching the good metal that everyone wants with the first flight of watches to hit dealers. And it's not just Rolex with the 2018 GMT, which again was launched in steel immediately, or the 2021 Rolex Submariner, again available immediately in steel. Other metals, yes, but immediately in steel. There's also Patek Philippe. Now, Patek Philippe generally doesn't do a lot of new watches in steel, so it was impressive for me when 2 years ago they launched the 5172 in white gold. Why is this impressive? Because if you look back to the 2010 5170J, you could see it was a very almost archaic style, antiquated in its appearance, almost like a vintage watch made new. You had stick indices, Roman numerals, a silver dial, a yellow gold case. This really wasn't the watch people wanted at the time. They wanted the white gold version, and Patek forced us to wait until 2013 to get the white gold version, and then 2015 to get the white gold version with a black dial. This time, if we can go back to the Patek 5172G, right out of the gate, you're getting the sex bomb, the blue dial, the white metal case, white gold immediately without a wait. What does this tell me? It tells me that watch brands, even big ones like Rolex and Patek, are much more in tune with what their buyers actually want these days. But it's not just those two. Vacheron in 2019, the same year the 5172 came out, they came out with the 56 collection. And the 56 collection was immediately offered in stainless steel. True, that blue model came a year later, but the initial 56 was available in every model in stainless steel alongside gold. Why? Because I think that's now a thing where even the most conservative and often tradition-bound brands like Vacheron and Patek and Rolex are going to launch what people actually want rather than forcing them to buy, say, yellow gold for 2 or 3 years until the good stuff finally drops. So that is a trend that I have noticed, and I think this is one that we're going to continue to see throughout 2021 and into 2022. Green dials. Okay, I don't know how every brand in Switzerland somehow coordinated during the design phase to launch every new watch with a green dial in 2021, but clearly this is something that is late breaking, and if I'm going to be totally honest, you could probably see the beginnings of it in 2019 and 2020. That right there is a 2021 model, and bully to Tag Heuer for making it available with the Heuer O2 caliber and the green dial. And if you look carefully, they did a green gradient dial, which makes them slightly innovative this year. But the 2021 Tudor Black Bay 18 karat, of course they were going for green. Now, does this watch look rather like the Harrods edition? Does it look rather like the bronze models? Yeah, in both cases, and we're going to find out whether the market truly has an appetite for a nearly $17,000 Tudor Heritage Black Bay. That said, they did supercharge the appeal, not with the gold, but with the green dial and bezel, the ace in the hole for this particular model launch. Rolex getting in on the action, and they should. Green has been their corporate color since time immemorial. This is not new to them, though as of last year, that particular Oyster Perpetual green with lacquer dial certainly is. More of a Kelly green than a metallic green. It's a good-looking lacquer and immediately became the most popular version of the 2020 and 2021 Oyster Perpetual, still highly sought in every size in which it is made. But then, La Doyenne, the high horology elder statesman of the industry, Patek Philippe this year, very trendy this time. The last of the Nautilus will also be the greenest among the Nautili. The 5711 stainless steel in both cases this year, coming out in its final edition as the 5711. I doubt it's the last automatic three-hand Nautilus. That said, it is a send-off for a model that's been with us since 2006. This model, of course, in both standard steel and iced steel. Yes, that's right, you can get it with diamonds, both with green metallic dials, proving that Patek Philippe is anything but immune to fashion. So, what else is new? Well, de Bethune even got in on the act. This is a true high horology brand. They're only making a few dozen watches a year, about 150 per annum, but somehow they managed to launch a green dial on their most accessible model, the automatic 43mm titanium DB27 Titan Hawk, meaning they are hitting the middle of the market in terms of appeal. Their most accessible watch with the most appealing dial in the year when green is just the thing, proving that even Denis Flageolet does occasionally pay attention to the wider world. So, what else is new? Well, we're in the early innings of this trend, but I think silver watches are going to be a thing. Now, in 2019, the first time a mass market brand launched silver in living memory, Zenith decided, well, I'm going to be honest, there were silver Cartier watches during the 80s and early 90s, but that's a long time ago. In the modern era, Zenith, of course, started launching silver Type 20 pilots watches back in 2019, and it was definitely not a thing at the time. Well, Tudor got into the act this year, and as soon as Tudor Rolex or Rolex Tudor does something, it is officially on the radar of everyone in the industry. They do set the standards for the business. And this watch at $4,300 actually makes sense for a precious metal Black Bay. Unlike the $16,800 18-karat yellow gold model, I can see a lot of people picking this up with steel watch money. So very, very cool. Zenith is even now on its second sterling silver watch with a chronograph Type 20, and Ochs Und Junior is proving that even little brands can follow trends and be hip, and they are now offering sterling silver alongside other materials in, by the way, cases up to 47 millimeters. So yes, they're doing silver, but they're also doing things that no one's done since the 2000s in terms of case size options. So if you liked sterling silver pocket watches, you can now wear one on your wrist thanks to Ochs Und Junior. Okay, another unfortunate trend that we're seeing now is inequality among watchmakers. And look, I'm realistic. Equality is something that will never occur anywhere ever. That said, we are seeing a disturbing split in the fortunes of brands. We're seeing this generally in luxury, and these are wildly divergent times for different luxury vendors across sectors. It's not just watches. Supercar maker McLaren had to lay off 1,200 people last year, while its direct rival Ferrari actually had its highest sales volume year ever, well into 5 digits. And Lamborghini, another Ferrari and McLaren peer, they had their second most voluminous year ever, but their most profitable year of all time. So like I said, it is a time of feast and famine, even for companies and brands in the luxury sector. So in the watch space, we've seen HYT, a favorite of mine, and Romain Jerome both declare bankruptcy. Romain Jerome was dissolved. I'm hoping HYT will find a buyer thanks to its Pressaflex subsidiary, which carries value over and above the HYT brand by itself. But I also know firsthand that a large number of small brands are either for sale and seeking financial security, or they're on the brink of insolvency themselves. So this is definitely a storyline that's going to expand as this year wears on. The latest Morgan Stanley Swiss watch industry survey, and they do this every year, so does Deloitte, so does Vontobel Bank. They're all worth buying, even if you're just an enthusiast of the industry. But they have basically confirmed what everyone knew, which is that the rich are getting richer. When you combine Swatch Group, Rolex, Louis Vuitton Moet Hennessy, and the Richemont Group, almost 77% of all Swiss watch export value is controlled by those 4 groups. Just those 4 groups. There are hundreds of companies in the industry, giving you an idea of how little is left, especially when you consider the companies like Patek Philippe and Audemars Piguet and Breitling have shares between 2 and 4.5%. There is really very little left for a lot of the small brands, including the high horology indies that we love. I'll also say that independents like F.P. Journe, Grunefeld, and Richard Mille cannot fulfill all of the orders that they have right here and right now, whereas other indies are, like I said, pursuing either bankruptcy, equity sales, or outright sales just to stay in the game. So I'll also mention this. It has become a game for the rich, as 70% of all Swiss watch export value right now, according to the Federation of the Swiss Watch Industry, 70% of value can now be attributed to only 10% of volume, meaning very expensive watches are almost exclusively driving the industry at this point. Let's see what you guys are saying in the box right here, because there are a lot of you and this live chat moves so fast. Right here I see Abdul saying, it is the best time to root for the losing teams with quality like Breguet, Girard-Perregaux, and Chopard, Louis Ulysse Chopard. Prices at the moment couldn't be lower, especially in pre-owned. We have Soma R saying, we didn't see a Ferrari SUV either, but it's coming. That's true. If you thought their volumes were high now, wait until, what are they calling it, the Pure Blood comes out? I think it's like Puro Sangue or Puro Sangue. It is going to be the first ever SUV, and shortly thereafter you will see the first electric Ferrari. So a lot is changing right here. I see we have John N saying, I would love to see more meteorite dials, but they seem really polarizing. You know what? I'm going to come out and say this. After the special edition Louis Erard watches, the enamel, the guilloche, I bet the next thing they do, bringing kind of high horology and craft arts to the lower end of the market, I bet the next thing they do is a meteorite dial for the 2022 model year. And then right here we have Watch Habit saying, the Swiss watch industry is experiencing the Walmart Amazon effect, and it sucks for sure. We also have John Doe confirming that he too would like to see more meteorite dials. Soma opining that a McLaren SUV would save the brand. We'll find out just what kind of a savior an SUV can be, because if any brand needs a savior right now, it's Aston Martin, and they have just launched the DBX SUV. So we will find out whether that is a viable option for McLaren down the road. We have Alexander R, love and respect from Seattle, up on the left coast. I got a friend who's a firefighter there, Luke Coran. He's with Seattle Fire Department. And we've got Fadden Space. Greetings from Jerusalem, staying up late with me. I appreciate that. We got fans watching in Israel. All right, guys. We have Sociable Loner saying Louis Ulysse Chopard represents unbelievable value. And we've got Offenlicht saying McLaren needs to stop releasing too many models and too many variants of models. I mean, I do luxury goods for a living, and even I have trouble keeping up with all the different variants. It was easy when they had one car ever, the McLaren F1 on the roadside. Now, I can't even keep track of all the Super Series, the Sports Series, the Ultimate Series, and the one-offs that they make for special clients. We got Renside saying the rich aren't getting richer, they're getting damn richer. And that is true, and that is true generally. And we've got Samir joining from Karachi, Pakistan, where it must be, am I getting this right, very early in the morning? Okay, let's talk about viewer wrist shots. Number 2, I asked, you answered. Simon N. of Napa, California, relaxes with man's best friend and his dog too. We have Kevin K. lets the watch do the talking with his Jaeger LeCoultre Duomet a Quantième Lunaire skeleton dial. Jonathan C. of Miami takes us to infinity and beyond, get it, with his vintage Rolex GMT 6542, and Loreno F. of Switzerland yachts inland on Lake Zurich with his Rolex Yacht Master. Thomas R. and his Omega Seamaster Planet Ocean prepare for the road with his Jeep Wrangler. Love that Americana right there. Send your wrist shots to mondaymailbag@thewatchbox.com to see your wrist on my list. Okay. Enrique Casiano saying the 675 LT is so awesome that it is. Pretty much every McLaren will snap your neck. So the question really becomes, what's your budget and which style do you like most? We have Time Hill joining in, and we've got Kamram joining in. Tim is smooth, man. Well, I hope so. I should. I've had enough practice at this. I've got no excuses. And we've got RM saying Zenith Dayfly Classic should have come as a screw-down crown. I haven't heard of any water intrusion in that watch just yet, but in general, for a swimmable watch, I do prefer to see that. We've got Jabo Surf from Adelaide, Australia, 675 LT. If you've never experienced one, do yourself a favor. All right, guys, and Thomas Burnett, beautiful duomet. I could not agree more. Let's talk about watches that changed the watch industry. These are real landmark pieces, not just personal favorites, but watches that had a real impact beyond their brands. Starting with the 1993 AP Royal Oak Offshore. This was a watch designed by Emmanuel Guet, then in his early 20s, based on the Gerald Genta Royal Oak, and it was originally conceived as a 20th anniversary tribute to the Royal Oak. Of course, Genta, proving that the revolutionary always becomes the establishment, absolutely hated this. That said, people in general loved it. This was a watch that was truly the first oversized modern high horology sports watch. It came out for the market exactly the same year as the civilian Panerai Luminor, but it played in a different space. Not just a big watch, but a big watch that could dance, with high horology moves and finish, and an impeccable pedigree from a brand that needed no explanation or introduction. I should also mention, there is no Hublot Big Bang without the Royal Oak Offshore, which makes me wonder what kind of a brand Hublot would be today if the Royal Oak Offshore hadn't debuted 9 years before the Big Bang launched at Baselworld. I can't say for sure. All I can say is somebody should be sending a very nice Christmas card to a brand in Les Brassus. Now, this commenced a general liberalization of high horology styles across the board. 3 years later, Vacheron Constantin re-entered the sports watch market at the high horology level with the first version of the Overseas. And while I can't say for sure that the rather compact 37mm initial Overseas owed a total debt of gratitude to the Royal Oak Offshore, I can confirm without a doubt that the second generation Overseas in 2004, the chronograph with a 42.5mm case, meteor proportions, and a high horology price to boot, that watch owed its existence to the Royal Oak Offshore. Patek Philippe in 1997. No, the original Aquanaut did not necessarily borrow the styling cues or the attitude of the Royal Oak Offshore, which was brash and unapologetic. But when you see a steel Patek Philippe sports watch with a rubber strap, there's only one place it got that inspiration during the 1990s, and it sure as hell wasn't techno time. It was coming from a peer. Others, like the Chopard Pro 1, the Jaeger-LeCoultre Master Compressor Extreme Series, or the Glasuta Original Sport Evolution Series and Sport Evo Impacts, all stem from this watch in the oversized sports watch segment. Today, it is still relevant. One of the very few watches in this genre that is, as we've even seen Hublot in recent years paring back the size of its watches, seeing the classic Fusion, for example, overtake the Big Bang as its best seller and phasing out the 48mm King Power altogether. The King stands alone. Now, let's talk about relevance. This watch is still relevant and still impressive and still being redesigned on a regular basis. In a year when any given number of AP complications in dress watches are treated like footnotes in the new model year, the Royal Oak and the Offshore are still the engines, the twin cylinders, the big V-twin that keep AP chugging along. Okay, 1999, F. Pigeorn and the Tourbillon Remontoir. F. Pigeorn was not the first with independent horology. He was not the first solo practitioner to do so under his own name. But I have to say this, very few watches did more to establish independent horology as a trend for the future and a space to watch and a legitimate form of art than F. Pigeorn and that first watch. Now, I should also mention that it's hard to overstate the impact this watch had in making Montrejourne, the company, not the man, a proof of concept for others that followed. Everyone from the Grunefeld brothers to Max Busser with MB&F to Moser to de Bethune. I mean, there was a lot of proof and confidence that came from the success of this watch under F. Pigeorn's name and his own brand. F. Pigeorn was for years, much like all of the other high-end independent masters, he would design stuff for other brands, take a check, and let them put their name on it. And that's what he did through companies like THA, his collaboration with Asprey, the work he did for the likes of Cartier and Piaget during the 1990s. He was not a guy who put his name on the watch. And in general, that really wasn't a thing. Sure, there were Franck Muller and there was Roger Dubuis, but those companies were operating on a different scale. Hundreds and thousands of watches. Initially, F. Pigeorn was launching just a few dozen a year, And they were dozens of this, the Tourbillon Remontoir. It proved that there was a place for AHCI masters who didn't want to go mass market like Franck Muller, but hoped to work on a larger scale than Philippe Dufour and his 6 to 10 watches a year. It also helped to create widespread interest in independent horology, which helped others down the line, like for example Laurent Ferrier, get investors to start up their independent brands. And today, everyone from Recep Recepi and his Recep Recepi watches to Remy Cool, who is effectively the next generation FP Journe, they do owe a debt of gratitude to FP Journe and Montre Journe. The legacy of this watch is their legacy as well. I should also mention that this movement in the Harry Winston Opus 1 helped to launch the Harry Winston Opus series, which in turn helped to launch MB&F Max Bousser and Friends, because Max chose FP Journe to design the first Harry Winston Opus watch, and FP Journe chose this movement for one of the Opus 1 series. Also important, the prototype was made all the way back in 1991, proving that this idea was kicking around in Journe's head for a really long time. And yes, that right there is a drawing. That is a drawing that sits on my desk in my office. It is the one that was auctioned. Check out Julie Crowless, the watch illustrator, if you haven't already. She is absolutely fantastic, and for the right price, she will immortalize your watch with 300 hours of work on a wooden platform in pencil. That is next level stuff. I can only aspire as an illustrator myself. But check that out, because she created that drawing of that FP Journe watch that became the Tourbillon Remontoir. Let's see what else is going right here. We have Time Hill commenting, interesting, the influence of FP Journe. And I'll admit that freely, because I'm not an FP Journe fanboy. I've always been constructively critical of the brand and admitted that even as Watchbox does a lot of business in Journe, and I respect that brand, I'm not totally in love with it. So for me to sort of extend an olive branch to FP Journe and acknowledge just how much of an influence that first watch has, you really understand it's not coming from the heart with me, but it is coming from the head, and I recognize a landmark when I see it. And then we have right now Moo saying, a counterpoint, FP Journe is Bitcoin in the watch world right now, and Moser and some other independents are Ethereum. Let's see what else is going on. Abdul R, AHCI Masters members and even candidates are selling watches like hotcakes at the moment. True, and they can all thank Journe for that. What else is going on? We've got Adam Crossfire joining in. He's a fan of the Lotus Elise and the Caterham, the Reborn Lotus 7. And what else is going on in the chat box right here? We've got Loy saying, the thing that bothers me about old offshores is that they're large watches with tiny movements. True, and that's why old offshores also don't have display case backs. And James too, he is a fan of the offshore, saying the Volcano or the Bumblebee, please. If you remember the Themes watches from the 2000s, the Volcano and the Bumblebee were two of them. Okay, 1999 and a Lange Sohne. This was not a new company, but it was a new watch. At that point, Lange, 6 years young under the reborn Lange Sohne name, launched a watch that arguably cemented the company's reputation and attracted Richemont's commitment to buying the brand. This was not just a landmark watch. The echoes through eternity continue to rebound. The 1999 Datograph was that kind of watch. The Datograph did to Patek Philippe and the 1998 5070 chronograph what the 1990 Acura NSX did to Ferrari in the era of its 348. It was a superior alternative coming from a non-traditional supplier out of left field and immediately overwhelming the dominant power in the brand with improved imagination, quality, and experience. That's what the Datograph was, and I'm a huge 5070 fan and Patek fan. It was a premium product, superior in almost every way, and no one saw it coming from a company out of East Germany that had only been making watches for 6 years. Good enough wasn't good enough anymore. Patek realized it needed to do two things. First, overnight the bar was raised so high that the finish of Patek watches needed to be raised to the level of this. That's the case back of the 1999 Datograph. Second, with Lange finishing movements like that and making the movement themselves, this ended the Lemania era of Patek chronograph calibers, and I mean killed it dead, because after that caliber L951, no Lemania-based CH2770 would ever again look right, appropriate, or expected in the back of a Patek watch. Patek needed to come out with the 29535, and it couldn't come fast enough after 1999. So even today, even after years of futile marketing and failed messaging, it has failed to dull the appeal of a Lange und Junior and its reputation as the German Patek Philippe and the unofficial fourth member of the Holy Trinity of High Horology. After all the damage Lange marketing has done to itself, because of the 1999 Datograph and its legacy, Lange still belongs amongst the very finest in the world, and I would even go so far as to say Lange finishing merits comparisons to the likes of Chronometry, Fernand Berthoud, and Grubel Forsey. It's that good, and back in 1999, the Datograph was brilliant right from the beginning. Okay, viewer wrist shots number 3. I asked, you answered. Your analog on my digital. Azam A of Saudi Arabia presents a knockout combination of Alfa Romeo and Louis Ulysse Chopard chronometer. The sociable loner hits the road, or off-road maybe, with his Jeep and Tudor Pelagos left-hand drive. Abdul S. of London shares his Omega Seamaster Aquaterra World Timer on a NATO strap curbside. We have John F. and Phoebe the dog present the Vempe Iron Walker Diver 40th anniversary. And J.H. and family enjoy the playground with his vintage Rolex Sea Dweller 666 from the watch box. Thank you for trusting our company. Okay, jumping into the box right here to see what you guys are saying right now. We have Alex O. saying new Panerai models are head scratchers. I don't know who wants them. It seems like they have one watch a year that's a hit, and then you just wonder about the rest. And I agree with you. We have Moo asking, what do you think of Nomos? I like them. I particularly like the enamel dial steel lambdas. For me, the caliber 1001 in the steel lambda with the enamel dial is the best watch they make. Easily the most interesting, only challenged by the Autobahn in blue. I love the Autobahn. So yeah, I'm going to put that up there. If I'm going to have a Lange, then any Lange will do. But if I'm going to go German value and I'm getting a Nomos, I want the Autobahn with a blue dial, or I want the steel Lambda with a blue dial. Or heck, why not the white gold Lambda? Go full Lux. I love that watch. Okay, we have right here Jabo Surf, 1815 chrono, black dial, my grail. And that movement in that 1815 chrono is descended from the great 1999 Datograph. We have Adam Crossfire. Wasn't the NSX originally designed for Ferrari too? That I've never heard. If you have a source for that, please point it out. There's a lot of myths surrounding Honda, such as the myth that Honda designed the original Lamborghini V12. Still not entirely debunked, but I have never heard that the Acura/Honda NSX was originally designed for Ferrari. I don't think Fiat-era Ferrari had its sights set quite that high. And then right here we have Time Hill saying Lange and Glasuta Original put Glasuta back on the horological map after the fall of the Soviet Union. And Alex O opining PAM 111 is a great watch that everyone should check out in person. And then Josh Raff asking, Tim, where's the Ploprof been? I love the Ploprof, but today we're not talking about my favorite retro re-edition watches, though we are talking about one of the most influential. Guys, I'm a Ploprof fan, old and new, you know I'm totally on board. I'm a true believer. Then we have right here Luis Molina asking, would you consider the 5170 being one of your favorite Patek Philippe's in its 5170p form with gradient blue dial, platinum case, and baguette indices? Then yes, I would consider it among my very favorites. And we have Loreno saying, you don't see many of the new NSXs. Interesting true fact. I just interviewed Jason Wilbur, designer of the original Devon Tread and designer of Wilbur watches, and he worked with Honda Advanced Design for 10 years. In that time, he met and married the designer of the second generation Acura NSX. That, by the way, we'll post to timmosso.com, where I post my lovely podcast series. All right, jumping back into watches that shook the watch world, the 2001 Ulysse Nardin Freak. This is arguably the watch of our era, and I don't mean in just one way, I mean in every way. A combination of the brilliance of Ludwig Axelin, Pierre Gigax, and Carole Forestier-Casapi. This is a watch that was the catalyst, I think, for an entire era. First of all, it introduced silicon technology in its escapement. Second, it used a very early wristwatch double direct impulse escapement that was probably too far ahead of its time. It didn't work well, but it was an absolute trailblazer that would later be emulated by independents from Laurent Ferrier to Carrie Voudelainen to F.P. Journe. That alongside silicon fabrication of the escapement. And it had a carousel tourbillon and an open dial. Really, the progenitor of many watches, including those by a number of high-end brands that put all of the fun on the dial side, with the movement being visible without having to remove your watch. And you can count on one hand how many 7-day power reserves there were back in 2001. It was a trailblazer in that respect too. Before long power reserves were a thing, this thing had a week of autonomy, and you wound it with the case back. So many different stars, from Pierre Gigax to Ludwig Axelin to Carole Forestier, came out of this watch, to say nothing about the technologies and the style it pioneered. If you can find the original version of this watch from 2001 with the original escapement, do not hesitate to buy it. Longines in 2007. I mentioned that there would be an influential vintage-inspired diver right here. This was a catalyst for an entire genre. Now, it was not the first vintage reissue. Longines itself, back in 1987, for the 60th anniversary of the Lindbergh flight across the Atlantic in the spirit of St. Louis, they reissued the Lindbergh pilot's watch that Longines itself had created with Lindbergh's assistance. So they were probably too far ahead of the trend. Like the Apple Newton Pad and the AMC Eagle, it doesn't help to be decades ahead of a trend. It helps to be a few months or years. But Longines had a big second act coming with the Heritage collection in the 2000s, and 2007 was really the year when I think the dam broke. True, Omega had done the museum collection before from 2001, and both Patek and Vacheron had done retro re-edition styles in the early 90s. But this watch, more than any other, brought us the era of retro re-editions at every price point, especially in the dive segment. I should mention that IWC, JLC, and Vulcain all followed this 2007 watch by reissuing their own version of the 1960s super compressor case dive watches. So when JLC and IWC are following in your tracks, you know you set a standard and created a trend. And the forever CEO of Longines, Walter von Connell, certainly did that with the Legend Diver. I'll also say that honestly, today, there's probably no Oris Divers 65, Rado Captain Cook, or even Tudor Heritage Black Bay without this watch, proving the mass market for vintage divers at affordable prices back in 2007. Okay, the Panerai Luminor Submersible, 1950, PAM 382, Bronzo. It is very rare in this industry where nothing is ever new that I can tell you for a fact we're able to trace the beginning of a trend to just one watch. And in the case of the bronze watch trend, that patient zero is the 2011 1,000-piece limited edition PAM 382 Bronzo. It's honestly Panerai creating something wonderful and then participating in the killing of that thing at the same time. Panerai, like the rest of the industry, over-iterated this. And ultimately, we got this. I type in bronze watches on Google image search, and that's what comes back. IWC, Maurice Lacroix, Tudor, basically everyone, including Rado, including Panerai itself, with 3 subsequent Bronzos, got in on this act. So it's hard to believe with the Panerai PAM 382 just how fresh and trailblazing that look was back in 2011. And while I think bronze watches became a cliche, I think this will always be one of the most collectible Panerai watches to own for all time immemorial. That's still a very cool watch, and the market has spoken. It considers the PAM 382 to be by far more valuable than any of the other Bronzos, and I still think it looks damn cool. If you own one of these, please do not sink it in vinegar or do whatever crazy crap people do to turn it into a boat anchor from the Titanic. Do not turn it into a crusty green clod of crap. preserve that case for posterity because it will be worth something down the line. Okay, the 2017 Zenith Day-Fi Lab. This is a watch that was cool at the time, but I got to admit I had reservations even then because I think this is the beginning of a trend that is not good. Here's my explanation. You could argue that de Bethune with the Resinique and Vaucher manufacturer with the Senfine technology beat Zenith to the concept here, but Guy Simon and other high-end kind of theoretical physicists working with LVMH made this work on a production watch before any of the pioneers in the space created a monolithic oscillator. And I'm going to explain what that is. But okay, 2017, we see the Day-Fi Lab, and it had its own version. They made about 10 of them, and well, that's the UN, my mistake right there. That's Ulysse Nardin, which made 12 in addition. But the mass market followed with the 2019 Day-Fi Inventor. This was the production version of this technology. The benefits are undeniable. It is superbly accurate, and I mean 1/4 to 1/3 of a second per day in variation. It requires almost no maintenance because it has very few moving parts, fewer still lubricated jewels, and the oscillator itself takes the place of a lot of metal lubricated parts, including the escapement of a standard watch and the balance staff. So this is a very simple system. If you can fabricate it and get through the math and the science and the computer-assisted process, this is a watch that really doesn't need any attention over time. I'll also say that you get a high power reserve as it has a remarkable combination of extraordinary vibration per hour rate and very little amplitude. How little? I'm talking amplitude between 6 and 18 degrees compared to a healthy mechanical watch running between like 290 and 310 degrees. So you get a good power reserve in spite of the fact that you can barely even see the movement. And finally, mass production will make this very cheap. And here's where I have my reservations. This unitary oscillator, and you can see it right here in the original Day-Fi Lab, it cannot be made or finished by hand, which reduces the human impact on the final watch you wear on your wrist. It also creates a component that cannot be serviced or repaired by hand, meaning much like a light bulb, when it's broke, and you just have to replace it. I don't like that trend in the luxury space where permanence and the human touch have long been associated with, well, frankly, the core appeal of luxury watches themselves. I'll also say that we're beginning to see just how cheap this technology is going to be, and I expect an avalanche of these things over the years from lower-end brands, because just recently, and it's a breakthrough for now, but it's going to become general soon and ubiquitous, Frédéric Constant with the slimline monolithic manufacturer proved that you can launch this technology in a watch that costs less than $5,000 and massively produce it. Why? Well, it uses the exact same technology. Here you can see that monolithic oscillator, and here it's replacing the balance, the hairspring, the escapement, all of that, including the regulation mechanisms, by a single disc grown by a computer process. I'm not in love with this, and it's kind of hard to fall in love with it. This is something that appeals to the head, but not so much the heart, and I really do feel like the beating heart is the core of the watch community. Because these things are imperfect, we love them more, because we are, after all, human beings. This is a little bit more robotic. All right, wrist shots number 4. Jeff of Bangkok, Thailand, sports his dad's 1970 Omega and Ducati Scrambler Mike Halewood edition. Very cool. Luca S. and his IWC Portuguese handwound overtook Switzerland's majestic Rhine Falls, looking on from the bridge. Terry C. lights up our Monday with the epic 2019 Ming 1706 Copper Dial Edition. Pratham K. of Toronto rides with Land Rover and Tudor to collect takeout cuisine curbside. Finally, Jihad C. pegs the meter and takes us home with both Nissan and Grand Seiko Godzillas. Guys, send your wrist shots to Monday Mailbag at thewatchbox.com to see your watches on my box. Don't forget to subscribe, comment in the description below, tell your friends about us. And I want to thank Sean, who, as ever, conducted us through the minefield of images and topics. Thanks to all of you. You make this the highlight of my week. Time out, Tim out. Thanks for logging on.